Hi, welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm Cassie Villela and I'm a realtor, property manager, and investor here in San Antonio, Texas. On this channel, we talk about all things real estate, from data and investing to home and garden. So if that's your cup of tea, make sure you like, subscribe, follow. I'm on all of the social medias. It's my name, Cassie Villela. Whatever you use the most, follow me there. And I usually put my content on all of the different channels. Moving on, we are finishing up the How to Buy a Home series. I'm really excited. This is something I wanted to do for a couple of years, so I'm glad that I finally got around to filming this. We are on the final step here. So last step, we talked about kind of all that stuff that's happening behind the scenes with the title company and appraisal and all of that that's kind of happening to make sure you get to closing. Today, we are going to talk about kind of right before closing, the last few things you need to do right before closing and what to expect. First of all, so last time we talked about ordering your appraisal as quickly as possible. Hopefully by the time, at least a week before close, you'll have the appraisal. The appraisal will have come in. Hopefully it meets the sales price, meaning the appraiser said, yes, this home is worth what they are trying to pay for it. Occasionally, and especially here lately, because of the seller's market and how fast the market has been moving, occasionally that appraisal is going to come in lower than the agreed upon price. So if that happens, it's a whole other negotiation at that point. You're going to need to lean on your realtor, and they're going to be trying to go back and forth with the seller. In the past in San Antonio, when the appraisal came in low, it was kind of assumed that the seller was just going to drop the price automatically. But now that it's a seller's market and there might be cash buyers waiting in the wings, you don't always have that expectation. You can't always assume that. So you want to make sure you talk with your agent, get a really good idea of what the strategy going forward is, and work something out. You may end up, in some cases, you may end up bringing extra cash because your lender is not going to give you more than the appraised value, whatever the appraiser says the home is worth. So if the seller wants more than that, sometimes you have to bring cash for this gap. And that's where that negotiation happens. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But if it does, it's not the end of the world. It's just trying to renegotiate there. But we're going to assume the appraisal came in just dandy, the contract's moving on, the closings go. The second kind of crucial moment that you're waiting for, once that appraisal comes in, then the underwriter can finish doing their job and sort of checking out every angle, and they will eventually give the clear to close. So that's like the magic word you're waiting for, clear to close. That means that the lender has checked every aspect of the deal out, is ready to send the money. So you can, go ahead and schedule closing and get ready after that point. Now, your mortgage broker or your loan officer has to send you something called a closing disclosure at least 3 days prior to closing. So this closing disclosure is very similar to the loan estimate that they legally have to provide you at the beginning of the process. The closing disclosure is, once again, going to show you your interest rate, your monthly payment, all of that information. It's going to show your loan amount, your closing costs, and how much cash you need to bring to closing. So it's a very important document. Make sure when you get it that you look over it very carefully. And if you haven't heard from your lender and it's 3 days before close, you better check in. Hopefully your agent will do that for you. But make sure, because many a closing has been delayed because the lender was not able to get that in that 3-day window. So that's a Dodd-Frank Act law. That's kind of a newer thing that, I guess it's not that new. It's been like a decade at this point, but it's now, kind of a standard procedure that's, legally obligated that you have 3 days to look at that document. So make sure that's like one of those important things that's kind of minor but can really screw up the whole closing. Now, Hopefully, the title company will send you a settlement statement before the day of closing. Sometimes, title companies are doing a lot right now. And so I have had cases where it's the day of closing that I get the settlement statement. Even when I'm purchasing a home, sometimes I'll get the settlement statement. One time I got it half an hour before closing, like just infuriating. But I'm just kind of setting the expectations because that just is what it is. It tends to be, most of the title companies across town are kind of like that. So hopefully you'll get it at least the day before closing. You want to go over that very, very carefully. You want to make sure that all of the lines match what the agreed upon contract said. So there might be, who paid for the survey. If you and your lender had an agreement, the lender was going to pay for the appraisal, make sure that happened. If your agent was going to give you back some of your commission, make sure that happened. Like, you got to make sure that each line, you understand what it means and that it reflects what it's supposed to, because I have found mistakes before in those. So you definitely want to have it hopefully the day before so you can go over that with your agent and make sure everything looks correct. You definitely don't want to be sitting at closing and discover a mistake, because it's just a real big hassle at that point to correct it. Now, also the day before, or sometimes the morning of, or on your way to closing, you will do the final walkthrough. So the final walkthrough is when your agent takes you through the home one last time before you sign the closing documents. Your agent is going to take you through the home one last time, the day before or the morning of. Now, if you had repairs done as part of the process, if the seller was going to do repairs, I always recommend going the day before. The reason is because on the final walkthrough, that is when you are checking to make sure that the repairs were done and they were done properly. Do not rely solely on an invoice. Like if they're supposed to fix some drywall and they send you an invoice that their handyman did it, you don't want to rely just on that. You want to go with your eyes and look at the drywall and make sure it was done properly and done at all. There have been some wild things attempted, but you want to make sure it's done. Now, if you had a really extensive repair amendment, or if there were things that are a really big deal, like safety things, like electrical stuff or roofing, something that you can't just look at and check with your eyes, you may want to have your inspector come back out and re-inspect. Now, they're not going to do their full inspection again, but they can stop by. This happens a lot for me, like a roof repair will be part of it because we have a lot of hail in San Antonio. So maybe there's some hail damage and the seller needed to fix some hail damage. The inspector needs to come back, climb on the roof, and visually verify that that was done, that it was done properly. Or a roofing contractor, if that's what you feel would be the most helpful. So you want to get somebody who knows what they're doing to make sure they did it right. Because once you buy it, if they didn't do it right, it is pretty difficult. You have to sue them. It's like a whole thing. So you want to make sure before you sign the papers that they did what they were supposed to do and they did it properly. So that's why I would always say the day before if any repairs were being made. I also recommend the day before if people were living in the home up until closing. Like if they are moving out as part of selling the home, you want to go the day before. I had a situation one time where I showed up the day before to do the final walkthrough, and the sellers had not even started packing. Not a box in sight. Like they just, I don't know what the expectation was, but we were supposed to close the next morning at 9 a.m. and here this house looked like nobody had even thought about packing. So that was an emergency situation and a lot of things had to happen, but it was a mess. We were able to close on time though, because we were able to get a moving company in and get the things done super quickly so we could still close on time. So that's just to say, if you wait until the day of closing, you are risking something. Now, if I'm buying like an investment property and it's empty when I'm looking at it and I didn't ask them for any repairs, morning of is fine, because there's nothing that I am like specifically making sure got done. But if somebody lived in it or if the seller made repairs, definitely go do your final walkthrough the day before. That's very key. Also, the day before, the title company will send you the final amount of cash to close, so the amount that you need to bring to closing. And so you usually have two ways you can pay at closing. You can either bring a cashier's check to closing and pay that way, or you can do a wire transfer to the title company. Now, we already talked in a previous video about making sure the money is ready to go if you're doing a wire transfer. Again, I just want to reiterate though, make sure that first of all, the bank you use does wire transfers. Make sure the money is ready to go. Make sure you know how to do that. I had a weird situation one time personally where I was trying to do it by phone, and then the bank was like, no, you have to do it online. But I didn't have my computer. I had to go home, get a computer, go to a Starbucks to transfer money, So you think about these things ahead of time. Make sure you're ready to go. You know what you're doing. Again, wire fraud. I probably talked about this last time, but wire fraud is huge. Make sure that the title company is going to email you the instructions. I want you to call the number that when you Google the title company's name, the number that Google shows you, call that number, verify the wire instructions. I have a good friend who had $50,000 almost stolen by wire fraud. So it really does happen. It really is, not uncommon. So make sure that you're not a victim. Make sure you check every single time. Even if it's the same title company you've used 100 times, call and double check. In the few days prior to closing, one other thing that I always have my clients do is switch the utilities to their name. So you want to switch your electric, your water, internet, get all of that started, because most of those companies take a few days before they'll actually be able to come out. So, if you're in San Antonio, you're going to go to SAWS, that's the water system, saws.org. And then there's an online way to have your water switched to your name, CPS as well. Different areas of Texas are obviously going to have different utility companies, but you want to go ahead and get that started at least 3 days prior to closing. Again, that's when you get that closing disclosure from the lender, that's a good day to do utilities and to schedule your closing date. Make sure that you get that done, because there's nothing worse than like, oh, I've got the keys to my house, but there are no utilities for a week. Like, nobody wants that, right? You want to have power when you move in. So go ahead and switch the utilities before closing. That way there's plenty of time for that to kick in. We have the amount of money. You're ready with your cash to close. You've looked through your settlement statement. You've looked through, you've done the final walkthrough through the house. You've reviewed everything and everything looks good. So then now it's time to go to closing. Now, generally, you're going to schedule your closing date a few days ahead of time. So, when you get that closing disclosure from the lender, that's like a good marker of when to go ahead and schedule closing. You want to call the title company or email them and let them know when you are available. A lot of title companies will send somebody to you, especially during the pandemic, if you're not able to get there. So that is sometimes an option, or they'll let you do it if they have several branches around town. You can do it at a different branch. But do keep in mind that sometimes they're going to charge you. If they send a mobile notary, you may have to pay extra for that. So you just want to keep that in mind. You might want to head down to the title company. I personally super enjoy sitting at the title company, like in the like super fancy chairs and, you know, at this very executive table signing a bunch of documents. I don't know, makes me feel like I'm in a movie, but I have signed docs in my backyard. So just whatever you prefer, whatever makes you comfortable. And then you're going to want to, when you're ready for close, like on closing day, whether you have a mobile notary or you're going to the title company, the main thing is that you've taken care of the wire transfer or you have the cashier's check ready to go at closing. And then you want to make sure you take a photo identification because the title company needs that for you to sign the documents. And then the photo ID needs to match, obviously, like the name you have on the contract. And so it needs to have like a signature on it. So that all of that is going to have to match. Different title companies have different degrees of how much they want it to match. But that's the case. So take your ID. You're going to sign a ton of documents, especially when you're selling, there aren't quite as many, but when you're buying, especially if you have a loan, there's just, your hand's going to fall off. You're going to sign your name so many times, but you know, it goes pretty quickly. The title company or the representative at the title company will usually explain to you what you're signing each page. If they don't, stop and ask questions. If you're concerned or if anything feels like I don't understand why this happened or this seems off to me, definitely just stop everything and ask. Like, nobody's going to get mad. It's more important that you understand what's going on and that you feel comfortable. Make sure, you know, ask your agent, what does this mean? Why do I have to agree to this? You know, whatever it is, just make sure you understand it because it's a huge decision. And I definitely am like, let's sit here all day if it takes, because I want you to understand this, because at the end of the day, I want you to feel confident and happy with your purchase. So closing, you don't get the keys at closing unless it's a cash transaction. If you did not have a lender and you just paid cash, yeah, you can usually get the keys at closing. But if it is a lender, like most properties are going to be, you have to wait until funding. Funding is simply when the lender has wired the money to the title company. And so you go through closing, you sign all these documents, and then the title company has to send those documents to the lender. Usually while you're still sitting at the table, they'll send them to the lender. The lender needs to go through everything, make sure everything checks out, make sure you brought the right amount of cash, everything. And then when they say, okay, yes, check, we've looked at everything, it looks good to go, they wire the money to the title company. Different lenders take different amounts of time. Usually it's the same day. And one thing I would suggest if you're scheduling your closing time, if you schedule it in the morning, that gives your lender all day to get the funding in. And so you're more likely to get the keys to your home that day. It could happen if you have like a 4:30 on a Friday afternoon closing that your lender is not going to get you funded until Monday, and then you can't have the keys until Monday because you cannot have that key until the payment has come through to the title company and thus to the seller. So, you know, you're going to need to make sure that happens first. So I always recommend early in the day closing. I think that's all of it. There are 1,000 minor little random things that could happen. That's what agents are for. That's why you have somebody there representing you, because all of the little things that happen along the way that it would be impossible to include in a how-to video, they can help you with that. But this is kind of, hopefully I've covered sort of the basics of the transaction, and you feel comfortable and confident buying your home. Best of luck with your home, with your future. I hope this was helpful. If you have any other questions, definitely comment below. One of those weird scenarios, if you have one, like send me a message. I'd be happy, if I'm legally allowed to or ethically allowed to help, I would be happy to do that. So again, like, follow, comment, subscribe, all the things, and I'll see you next time.